Chapter 1378, Change of Plans. On the different Ammon's faces, the monocles in different forms emitted pure light. This was something they had stolen from the depths of the ruins of the Battle of Gods. It came from the ancient sun god's eternal daytime effect there. It could purify filthy and evil objects and awaken sleeping creatures. They gifted this to Klein. This, combined with the ability to control the strength of seals obtained from the apprentice domain's authority, was enough to break the state of eternal slumber. In that instant, the mental imprint of Antigonus and the will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings in Klein's body awakened. The madness, the vastness, cruelty, bloodthirstiness, and coldness were like an invisible storm that wreaked havoc in Klein's mind. Almost at the same time, in the fool's uniqueness that he wore on his face without fully accommodating it, the powerful will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings seemed like a terrifying monster that had been sleeping in the darkness for thousands of years. It suddenly opened its eyes. The former chaos and loss of control swept over again at that instant, but Klein didn't panic. Following one of his contingency plans, he calmly used the grafting ability to guide the mental imprint of Antigonus to celestial worthies' will in the fool's uniqueness, allowing the 2,000 years of entanglement between them to collide again. Meanwhile, Klein relied on his own consciousness and the anchors from the fool and the sea god believers to balance out the celestial worthy's will contained within his beyonder characteristic, just like when he separated out the attendant of mystery's marionette. If there weren't any accidents, and if this continued, there was a chance that Klein would be able to balance between the two sides and completely accommodate the fool's uniqueness. He would enter the final stage of the ritual, but how could there be no accidents when he was surrounded by Ammons? Several Ammons strengthened the seal of the Trunsost brass book and the magic wishing lamp to resist the former's rule limitations. Some Ammons gave the eternal daytime to Klein, and a small number of Ammons locked onto Klein and attempted a theft. They were trying to steal his lucidity. One Ammon failed after another, but in the end, there were still a few Ammons who succeeded. They stole away Klein's self-awareness for the next 2 seconds. Klein's thoughts blurred. Without his guidance, the Antigonus's mental imprint, the two wills of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, as well as the anchors from his believers instantly lost their balance and began to madly invade, influence, and corrupt each other. Everything became extremely chaotic, and it was as if it was developing irreversibly. Klein's body collapsed inch by inch, turning into clusters of transparent and distorted maggots as he extended even more slippery and sinister tentacles. And at this moment, the rules on the Trunsost brass book were wiped away and began writing. Speaking is prohibited here. Attacking each other is prohibited here. Soon after, a familiar text appeared before the two rules. All the following rules are ineffective. After the seal was strengthened, the Trunsost brass book seemed to enter a new cycle, and the influence the genie exerted on it became rather limited. Klein's consciousness quickly regained lucidity, but the situation in his body was completely chaotic and out of control. This made him completely unable to deal with the different influences or have any hope of finding a new sense of balance. In other words, he would run down the path of losing control until he became a monster. Without any time to think, Klein initiated his final contingency plan using his instincts and experience. He instantly gave up on saving his body and no longer focused on this matter. Not only that, but Klein had also even allowed the attendant of mystery's marionette to turn into a whirlpool of maggots and let it fuse with his body, along with Zeratol's mental imprint. He wanted to mess things up. However, Ammon's avatars wouldn't allow him to make any attempts. Apart from the Ammons, who were fighting against the magic wishing lamp and the Trunsost brass book, the rest of them began to steal, once again, trying to throw Klein's thoughts into chaos again until he completely lost control. The Ammon in the postman uniform succeeded, but what he stole was Klein's lucidity, but a drop of fresh blood. This blood immediately seeped into Postman Ammon's palm. Right on the heels of that, Postman Ammon's eyes turned crimson as his stomach bulged at an unimaginable speed as it squirmed. He seemed to be pregnant with a child. He had stolen the blood blessed by the primordial moon, or in other words, the mother goddess of depravity. Klein no longer placed most of his consciousness on balancing the Antigonus's mental imprint, the awakening will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, and his anchors. There was no need for him to endure it passively like before. He could barely respond to Ammon's theft. He used grafting to change the target that Ammon had stolen to Sephra Castle and tampered it to the junk pile, replacing it with the blessed blood of the primordial moon. This was from Shaman King Klarman. There was no doubt that there was a certain connection between Ammon's avatars. Furthermore, it was impossible for their levels to reach sequence 0. Therefore, when the postman Ammon was contaminated by that drop of blood, the other Ammons also showed levels of chaos. Some of their stomachs protruded as well. Some of their eyes were dyed crimson, while others had invisible babies in their arms as they walked in circles on the spot. This caused the other, theft, to inevitably fail. Klein seized this opportunity and used the brief moment of lucidity to stir the power of Sephra Castle to cast a shadow over the ancient palace. This place was once again concealed. Then, he ignored the mental imprint of Antigonus in his body, Zeratol's mental imprint, and the two wills of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings that was beginning to fuse together. He made the blank-faced avatar, which stood nearby, without having shown any breakdown to extend his hand towards his main body. Its 5 fingers quickly closed, and its wrist quickly twisted. As Klein's self-consciousness didn't resist and even took the initiative to cooperate, his avatar didn't suffer many failures before using the help from Sephra Castle to successfully steal his own consciousness, fate, anchors, and most of his identities. The only identity he left behind in his main body was his identity related to the Fool. At the same time, he had also stolen the identity, fate, and mental imprint of the Antigonus family's ancestor, the mark of fate and spirit. This could only succeed in a few tries thanks to his self-consciousness cooperating. As the stream of light with countless distributaries appeared, Klein's avatar's face contorted as it turned into Klein Moretti, who had fused with Ammon Sparrow's traits. He had become the main body without any beyonder characteristics. Of course, his self-consciousness and anchors were still resisting the mental imprint of the Antigonus family's ancestor. But compared to before, this was undoubtedly much easier to deal with. Having already adapted to the identity of Antigonus, he quickly found a new balance, delaying the fate of losing control. Although this remained unavoidable, it gave him a certain amount of time for his subsequent actions. On the other side, in the spot where Klein's original body was, there was only the Fool's uniqueness, all the beyonder characteristics from the curtain, the beyonder characteristics that originated from Zeratol, the tiny number of beyonder characteristics which Klein had consumed and digested previously, as well as the awakening will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, the remnant mental imprint of Zeratol, as well as the Fool's identity. And without Klein's self-consciousness, Antigonus's mental imprint, and the large number of anchors involved, Zeratol's remnant mental imprint was quickly destroyed and corroded by the awakening will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. In the next second, Klein's main body suddenly fell silent. The collapse of his body stopped. He lowered his head and stopped extending the slippery and sinister tentacles around him. He was so quiet that he appeared to have lost his soul. In such a scene, the silence was even more terrifying than madness. That frozen body seemed to be giving birth to an extremely terrifying monster. Klein didn't care about what was happening. He quickly grafted the partial connection between himself and his main body above the gray fog. Then he shifted his target and locked onto Antigonus, who was on the huge stone chair. Without receiving Ammon's help, the former half-fool failed to escape from his state of eternal slumber. Klein once again reached out his right hand, stealing the remaining sequence 9 and 1 beyonder characteristics of the other party. Although he was currently using the identity and fate of Antigonus, it was still difficult for him to complete the theft. Failure was inevitable. At that moment, outside the realm of mysteries created by Sephra Castle, Ammon regained his consciousness from the initial chaos. They raised their hands and adjusted their monocles, causing the redness in their eyes to vanish. Others looked down at their stomachs and reached out to stroke them. A second later, the bulging stomachs split open, and baby after baby with faint crimson colors appeared. These infants didn't cry, nor were they deformed. All of them took out crystal monocles from the void in smooth succession and wore them to their right eye. The number of Ammons increased. He had converted the babies which were due, turning them into his avatars so as to prevent the corruption of the primordial moon from interfering with him. At this moment, Earth Mother and God of Steam and Machinery had achieved the upper hand to some extent on their respective battlefields. They could finally make use of this small advantage to interfere with the situation inside the palace. Instantly, a portion of Ammons turned into plants as they bloomed or bore fruit, returning to the land. A portion of Ammons became knowledge, information, and words, as they ended up imprinted into an illusory book. However, there were still some Ammons who had used blink, relied on loopholes, or from using the deception of the rules to successfully avoid the influence of the two true deities. As they continued to strengthen the seal of the magic wishing lamp and the Trunsost brass book, they opened a door in Klein's realm of mysteries. At the same time, the angels also noticed the changes in the astral world, but their gazes were unable to penetrate the Earth Mother's natural barrier and the God of Steam and Machinery's civilization picture. They couldn't see the interior at all. This also meant that, even if they wanted to exert influence, there was nothing they could do. Inside the realm of mysteries created by Sephra Castle, Klein finally succeeded in stealing the Beyonder characteristics of Antigonus from Sequence 9 to Sequence 1, ones that had been digested. Due to the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence, the latter had attracted many Beyonders of the same pathway over a long span of history. While turning them into marionettes, he had also absorbed their Beyonder characteristics. Therefore, at that moment, there was still a large number of Seer pathway Beyonder characteristics left in Antigonus's body, including a Miracle Invoker Beyonder characteristic. The dark points of light quickly merged into Klein's body and fused with him. As he was now Antigonus, and as all the Beyonder characteristics had been digested by Antigonus, his fate of losing control didn't speed up as he maintained his previous progress. This way, Klein had once again become a Sequence 1 attendant of mysteries, one who had already digested the potion, with a fate that pointed towards losing control. At this moment, his original main body raised his head, his eyes dark. However, from this glance, the present Klein's mind instantly slowed down as his body turned cold. He almost had no way of resisting it. The powerful will that he was very familiar with began to slowly rise, attempting to influence Sephra Castle. The Lord of the Mysteries had awakened to a certain threshold in Klein's main body. The Fool had become a truly great existence that was being awakened. It matched the guess of the Tarot Club and was in conflict with true history. Before Klein's thoughts slowed down, he took the initiative to cooperate with Ammon and dispelled the realm of mysteries, allowing the situation inside to interact with the outside world. He had already fooled history without any problems, just like the first plan he came up with. As for how to end it, he never had a good idea. According to the changes in the situation, the final plan he activated at this critical moment was to not leave himself any way out. He would go from accommodating the Fool's uniqueness to advancing to the true Fool. In any case, this wouldn't be worse than the previous situation.